March 9, 1945. Night over Tokyo. The wind is still. Below, a city of wood and faith sleeps beneath a thin skin of peace. 17 million souls crowded into houses made of pine, paper, and prayer. From high above, 40,000 feet higher, the bomb bay doors of the first B-29 open with a metallic sigh. Inside, the lead bomber, Colonel Jack Phillips, stares through the bomb sight. He can see the rivers glimmering like dark veins. The city looks fragile, weightless, almost beautiful. He whispers to his co-pilot, "Let's hope they're asleep." At 11:59 p.m., the first flare drops, a white star drifting down toward the heart of the capital. Then the rain begins. Canisters tumble through the air, spinning, trailing sparks. They burst before they touch the ground, showering fire across the streets of Koto and Asakusa. Within seconds, rooftops blossom with light. Wood ignites. The night exhales flame. Tokyo does not explode. It ignites. Wind feeds fire. Fire births wind. Walls collapse in sheets of embers. Men and women run barefoot through molten alleys, shadows flickering against the inferno that once was home. The rivers boil. Smoke drowns the stars. From the cockpit, Philip sees the reflection climb up into his windshield. A sunrise made of sin. He murmurs, "God forgive us." By dawn, Tokyo will no longer exist. A city melted overnight, and for the 314th Bomb Wing, this is only the beginning. Tokyo, 1945. A city alive with noise, street vendors shouting above trams, bicycle bells ringing through alleys, temple bells marking another rationed morning. From the air, it looks infinite, a sprawling labyrinth of timber and tile stretching to the bay, but beneath that beauty lies fragility. Every beam, every wall, every tatami mat is tinder. The empire has been at war for 8 years. Men have vanished to China, Burma, the Philippines. Now the home front itself bears the weight. Factories hum beside schools. Children assemble cartridge fuses in classrooms. Mothers weave uniforms on floor looms in kitchens already blackened from coal smoke. Still the emperor's voice, while distant, divine, assures them of protection. Tokyo believes itself eternal. In the Marianas, a different faith is forming, faith in machinery. Guam, Northfield across 1,500 miles of ocean. The 314th Bomb Wing works through tropical rain. Under searchlights, rows of B-29 Superfortresses crouch on the tarmac, silver giants breathing heat. Mechanics strip them bare. Turrets removed, armor plates unbolted, guns pulled out by crane. Each bomber is refitted for one purpose, to carry more fire. Brigadier General Curtis LeMay walks the line, cigar clenched between teeth, smoke curling into humid night. He knows precision bombing has failed. The jet stream scatters bombs. Clouds hide targets. Fuel runs out before results appear. Now he means to end it. He tells his crews, "We're going in low. We'll trade accuracy for effect. Tokyo is a wooden city. We'll burn it to the ground." Some of the young men laugh nervously. Others stare at the ground. They know what 7 tons of M69 incendiaries can do. Each small bomb releases burning napalm gel. 100 seconds of fire at 1,500 degrees Celsius. Multiply that by 500,000. Multiply that by wind. The calm before March 8 brings cold rain over Tokyo. On narrow lanes, women spread washing beneath awnings. Children chase each other through puddles. Few notice the quiet absence of anti-aircraft guns. Many have been moved to protect the emperor's palace. Rumor says the Americans won't bomb so close to His Majesty. People believe it because they must. A young seamstress named Aiko Shimada finishes her shift at a uniform factory near Ueno. She writes to her brother fighting on Iwo Jima. "Tokyo is safe. Mother prays every morning." She folds the letter carefully. It will never reach him. Departure March 9th, 17 hours. Engines thunder across Guam. Aircrews file to their planes carrying talismans, photographs, lucky coins, rosaries. Colonel Phillips climbs into his cockpit, runs fingers over the flight map taped to his knee. Target Zone B, Shitamachi District. Wind northwest at 30 knots. Estimated ETA, midnight. At dusk, the first B-29 lifts into violet sky. By nightfall, more than 300 Superfortresses stretch nose to tail across the Pacific, engines droning like a single mechanical tide. Below them, only darkness and waves. Over Japan at 23 hours, Japanese radar near Choshi Peninsula detects faint echoes. Operators send urgent messages to Tokyo Command. The sirens begin. Aiko wakes to their scream. Her mother lights an oil lamp. Calm, practiced. They pull on their padded coats, grab buckets, run to the community well. They've done this many times. They expect nothing. But tonight the wind smells of gasoline. They approach the lead B-29 reaches Tokyo Bay at 11:58 p.m. Through broken clouds the city appeared, a black mirror dotted by rivers. "Flare ship release," Phillips orders. A bright magnesium star falls, marking the wind. Seconds later, hatches clang open along the formation. Tons of M69 clusters spill into the void. The first fires spark along the Sumida River, spreading in threads of light. Then the wind shifts, fanning them outward. From the cockpit, it looks like veins of molten gold crawling across the map. Within minutes, the city becomes a living furnace. Phillips radios, "Target lit. All groups, drop on mark." The radio crackles with awe and fear. Jesus, look at it go. Stay steady, don't look back. But everyone does. Even at 5,000 feet, they feel the heat. Hell unfolds on the ground, the world ends by degrees. Aiko and her mother see the first flames leap the rooftops. They run toward the canal, carrying wet blankets. The air becomes solid, smoke and dust pressing against lungs. Flames roar down alleys faster than men can run. Roof tiles shatter. Electric wires fall, sparking against bodies. Those who reach the river find no salvation. The surface shimmers and oil and debris ignite, turning water to fire. The heat is so great that clothes combust without touch. People dive in and do not rise again. In the morning, the water will still steam. Dawn at 030, the bombers turn south. Behind them, 40 square miles of city are gone. From 7,000 feet, the glow stretches to the horizon. The rising heat creates turbulence so fierce that one B-29 flips on its back. Inside, Phillips sits wordless, watching the storm devour the world. He knows what they've done. He also knows it will be repeated. Kobe, Nagoya, Osaka, back over Tokyo, nothing moves. The firestorm has consumed itself. Smoke hides the dawn. When sunlight finally pierces the haze, it falls on a landscape of ash. Chimneys standing like gravestones. Streets mapped only by the shadow of what burned. In the silence, a bell from a shrine rings once. Its bronze cracked by heat. Aiko Shimada sits on the riverbank, hair singed white, holding her mother's scarf. Around her, the city steams. A voice on the wind repeats an order that no one remains to follow. Buckets. More water, but there is no water left. The flames moved like living creatures, breathing, feeding, multiplying with a hunger that no human language could describe. What began as sparks across wooden rooftops now surged through Tokyo like a storm unchained. The city, once a map of streets and canals, had become a single, unbroken sea of fire. From above, the B-29 crews could no longer see the ground, only the pulse of the inferno. It was as if a second sun had risen beneath them, molten and alive, turning night into a terrible day. The air inside the bombers shimmered with heat from below, and the smell, burnt lacquer, oil, and flesh, rose even at 5,000 feet. Below, the firestorm began to create its own weather. Flames drew oxygen in violent gusts, fanning themselves into tornadoes. Wind roared down alleys, lifting burning debris high into the sky. Entire houses were torn from their foundations and hurled through the air like paper. The conflagration devoured oxygen so completely that people collapsed in their shelters before the flames reached them, suffocated in airless heat. The spiral of heat at 12:45 a.m., the city center ceased to exist as geography. The wards of Koto, Fukagawa, and Asakusa merged into one great vortex of flame. Temperatures reached 1,600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt iron, glass, and stone. Telegraph wires sagged and snapped, writhing like serpents across the streets. The Imperial Palace district glowed at the horizon, untouched only by accident of wind. Elsewhere, Tokyo's countless rivers, the Sumida, the Arakawa, the Kanda, became lines of boiling light. People sought refuge in canals, believing water to be safety, but the heat drew oxygen from the surface. The rivers themselves began to burn. Witnesses later spoke of human figures turned black and still, floating among roof beams and tatami mats. Aiko Shimada stumbled toward the edge of the Sumida, with her face wrapped in a wet cloth. Her mother had fallen behind, lost in the smoke. Aiko could no longer breathe. The air itself had become fire. Around her, men and women plunged into the water, their screams swallowed by the hiss of steam. She tried to follow, but a surge of wind lifted sparks around her like red snow. Over the city high above, Colonel Jack Phillips circled once more, defying orders to return. He wanted to see what they had done. The radio crackled with the voices of other crews, static mixed with disbelief. "It's like hell down there. I can't even describe it." The heat struck the underbellies of their bombers like fists, turbulence from the rising air threw the formation into chaos. One superfortress was caught in an updraft so violent it gained 3,000 feet without power. Another was flipped sideways, windows bursting inward. Gunners stared downward through plexiglass that began to soften. In one plane, the flight engineer vomited into his mask and kept working. In another, a gunner turned away from his viewport, muttering, "We're all gonna burn for this." Phillips pressed his hands against the control yoke, eyes fixed on the horizon. He had flown missions over Europe, Hamburg, Dresden, but never had he seen a city die so completely. Tokyo wasn't a target anymore. It was a wound opening in the earth. Below the storm by 1:30 a.m., the firestorm had reached its peak. A single vast column of flame rose 5 miles high, capped with a thunderhead of black smoke that generated its own lightning. The noise was constant: wind, explosion, collapsing wood, a sound so total that survivors later said it drowned thought itself. The civilians who had fled to parks or riverbanks found themselves trapped. The open spaces became fire bowls as burning debris rained down from the sky. People clung to each other, shielding children under wet blankets that dried to ash in seconds. Near Honjo, the firebreak trenches dug by civil defense workers filled not with safety, but with bodies. Some tried to crawl under stone bridges, but the oxygen vanished there first. Many suffocated silently, their lungs burned from the inside. Aiko Shimada crawled through rubble toward a drainage ditch, coughing blood. Around her, the city's roar became a single endless note like wind through a furnace. She remembered her brother's last letter. "If I die, keep the family altar burning." Now, the entire world was altar flame. The collapse of the sky, the firestorm, consumed 40 square miles in under 3 hours. From above, it looked like a glowing whirlpool, a storm of flame rotating on itself. The winds generated inside reached 100 miles an hour. Roof tiles, doors, and even people were pulled upward, carried hundreds of feet before vanishing in the blaze. At 2:10 a.m., Phillips finally turned south for home. The instruments in his cockpit read erratic. The heat had warped the dials. As the bombers climbed away, one of the crew whispered, "You can see it from 100 miles." And they could. A pillar of light visible even from the Pacific horizon. Behind them, Tokyo screamed itself silent. The oxygen gone, the flames slowly starved, leaving nothing but smoke and embers that glowed through dawn. The dawn of a shot sunrise, the wind fell still. What remained of Tokyo was unrecognizable. 40 square miles of charcoal. Streets no longer existed. Landmarks had been erased. The Imperial Palace still stood, an island of green in a desert of ruin. The rest of the city was black and gray, the ground still hot enough to blister bare feet. In the Sumida district, a few survivors wandered through smoke, faces coated in ash. Some called out names, others simply stared. The fire had erased distinction: men, women, soldier, child. The bodies along the riverbanks were charred beyond recognition, many fused together by heat. Aiko stumbled through the ruins until she reached what had been her home. The foundation was gone. She knelt and sifted through the ashes with blistered fingers until she found a small metal hairpin, her mother's. She closed her fist around it and did not cry. There were no tears left in the city of paper. The return flight, when the B-29s landed at Guam after dawn, they brought back silence. Ground crews cheered, but the airmen said nothing. Phillips climbed down from his plane, eyes red from smoke that had followed them halfway across the ocean. LeMay met him on the tarmac. "How bad?" he asked. Phillips hesitated. "Sir, Tokyo's gone." LeMay nodded once. "Good. That'll save lives later." He turned away before anyone could answer. Inside the debriefing tent, the crews described turbulence, flames, the city's glow visible even through clouds. When asked how it compared to Dresden, one pilot said, "There's no comparison. Dresden burned, Tokyo dissolved." That night, LeMay sent his report to Washington. Successful mission. Estimated damage, 16 square miles completely destroyed. Civilian casualties undetermined. The true number would reach over 100,000 dead. Another million homeless. What remained in the following days? Reconnaissance planes photographed Tokyo's ruin. The images looked like the surface of the moon. No color, no shape, just shadow. Factories, temples, schools, and gone. The imperial government, stunned, refused to broadcast casualty counts. Radio Tokyo instead announced, "The enemy attacked with cowardly incendiaries. The emperor's spirit endures." But for those on the ground there was no endurance. Refugees filled every road leading out of the city, carrying bundles of ash. Hospitals overflowed with the burned and blind. Doctors ran out of morphine within hours. Some amputated limbs with kitchen knives cooled in buckets of water. And still the raids continued. Within days, the 314th returned to the skies: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. Each night another city joined Tokyo in fire. For the crews, there was no time for reflection. Orders, flight checks, fuel, altitude. Routine replaced morality. Yet in quiet moments, some of them heard it again. That soft roar under the engines. The memory of fire following them across the sea. The city of silence weeks later. When foreign correspondents were allowed near Tokyo, they found a landscape stripped of sound. The city no longer smelled of life, only ash. Survivors wandered among ruins, collecting fragments of iron to sell for food. In one park, a police officer had counted 44,000 bodies before collapsing from exhaustion. The journalist Bernard Hoffman wrote, "I walked for miles through the ashes of Tokyo and saw not a single unburned building. The earth still smoked under my boots. This is not war. This is extinction." From the imperial palace balcony, Emperor Hirohito gazed across the wasteland. He said nothing. Behind him, advisors whispered of surrender and shame. The army still dreamed of resistance. But the sky, that vast American sky, was now unstoppable. By 3 a.m., the heart of Tokyo had ceased to be a city. It was a single roaring organism, a storm of fire feeding on itself, devouring oxygen, devouring life, devouring sound. From the air, it looked like the gates of another world had been opened, a luminous wound pulsing against the darkness of the Pacific. The B-29 crews had turned homeward, leaving behind a hell that no bomb site could measure. Below them, hundreds of thousands still fought for breath. The air was no longer air. It was smoke, embers, heat thick enough to burn lungs raw. Every breath was pain. Every movement drew fire closer. Aiko Shimada pressed her face into the ground, her skin blistered, her hair singed white. Around her, the street had vanished. Only firelight, ash, and the sound of the wind screaming through collapsing houses. The heat moved in waves so hot that her clothes smoked where they touched her skin. She could no longer tell where her body ended and the air began. The firestorm's heart. The phenomenon unfolding over Tokyo that night was unlike anything the human world had seen. Scientists would later call it a self-sustaining conflagration, a fire so vast it creates its own weather. It pulled oxygen from every direction, forming a vortex of flame that roared down alleys like a living hurricane. At the fire's center, temperatures soared past 1,600 degrees Celsius. Asphalt bubbled and ran like tar. Steel beams softened, bending into grotesque shapes. Entire rows of buildings lifted into the air before dissolving into sparks. The hurricane of fire rolled north to Ueno, west to Asakusa, south toward Koto. It devoured neighborhoods by the minute, each block consumed in 30 seconds or less. Those who had survived the first hours now found the wind changing, dragging the flames back upon them. Some leapt into the canals, believing water would save them, but the water boiled, choked with debris and burning oil. Witnesses spoke of people vanishing in clouds of steam. "We thought the river was mercy," one survivor said. It was another mouth of the fire. The city becomes light at 3:15 a.m. The firestorm reached its peak intensity. The oxygen rush produced a roaring sound that could be heard 40 miles away. Not thunder, but a continuous, monstrous inhalation. The night sky above Tokyo glowed orange even from the coast of Chiba. From Okinawa, naval observers described the city as a burning flower. Flames spiraled upward in petals, converging into a single stem of smoke that climbed miles into the sky. Inside that column, debris turned to ash before it touched the ground. The storm generated winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Roof tiles, bicycles, even human bodies were lifted into the sky. At ground level, the fire advanced faster than any man could run. The heat drew all air toward its core, an invisible tide that pulled people off their feet, dragging them toward the inferno. Aiko stumbled into a drainage ditch and covered her head with her arms. Sparks rained down like snow. Her skin blistered as she pressed herself into the mud. Around her, the sound changed, no longer crackling but roaring like surf. The city was now an ocean of fire, and she was its last wave. The radios of the dead at a communications post near the Imperial Palace. A young army operator named Sato crouched beside his transmitter. The antenna outside had melted in the heat, the wires sagging. Still, he tried to send a signal. "This is Tokyo. The city is burning." Static swallowed his words. The message reached no one. Sato wiped sweat from his eyes, blinked at the instrument panel, and whispered into the microphone again. "All stations, this is Tokyo. Fire everywhere." His commanding officer entered the room, his uniform streaked with soot. "Cut the transmission," he said. "You'll draw attention to the palace." "But sir." "Cut it." The operator lowered his hand, staring at the radio like it might answer. Then he did something no one saw. He pressed the key one last time and tapped out a message in Morse. "Forgive us." The pilots returned far out over the Pacific. The 314th bomb wing flew in silence. No chatter on the intercoms, no laughter. Only the hum of engines and the slow creak of metal cooling after the climb through turbulence. The smell of smoke still clung to the cabins, carried upward by the thermal winds that had followed them home. Colonel Phillips sat motionless in the cockpit, hands loose on the controls. His co-pilot stared straight ahead, eyes hollow. For hours, neither spoke. Finally, one of the navigators broke the silence. "Do you think they'll surrender after this?" Phillips didn't look at him. "No, not yet. What will it take?" "More fire." The navigator turned away, pressing his forehead to the cold glass of the window. Below, the Pacific shimmered, moonlight glinting off endless black water. Calm, indifferent, eternal. Behind them, the glow of Tokyo still marked the horizon, a faint scar of light stretching upward into the night. The ground of shadows by dawn, the firestorm had burned itself to exhaustion. Smoke rolled low across the city, hiding what remained. The first light of morning revealed a landscape no longer made of streets and buildings, but of texture. A sea of ash, shadows, and silence. The Imperial Palace stood untouched, a lone island in a dead ocean. Everywhere else was ruin. Civilians staggered through the gray light, faces coated with soot. Many were blind from smoke. Some walked barefoot across ground that still burned beneath the surface. Others wandered without direction, calling out names that would never be answered. The Sumida River was filled with corpses, packed so tightly the water could no longer flow. Soldiers used bamboo poles to push them toward the banks. The stench rose before the sun. Aiko climbed from her ditch and began walking. She no longer recognized anything. Not streets, not temples, not sky. Every landmark was gone. In the distance, she saw the blackened skeleton of a trolley car half buried in ash. She approached and sat beside it, too weak to stand. A single bird called from somewhere above, then went silent. The counting of the lost at noon. Army units entered the burned wards to assess damage. They moved slowly through the ruins, faces wrapped in cloth against the smoke. Every step sank into soot. In some places, the ash was ankle-deep. In others, it reached their knees. By nightfall, the count began. 100,000 dead, perhaps more. Whole neighborhoods erased from the census, 1 in every 3 citizens missing. Reports reached the Imperial General Headquarters that the city's manufacturing had been annihilated. Aircraft plants, arsenals, supply depots, all gone. For the first time, the Emperor's advisors spoke the word defeat, but outside the people dug through rubble with their bare hands, searching for anything that still had weight, a teacup, a coin, a memory. Aiko found what was left of her mother the next morning, a shape in the ashes still curled around the family altar. The small ceramic statue of Cannon, the goddess of mercy, had survived, its surface cracked but unbroken. She picked it up and held it to her chest. The city that had believed itself eternal now lay in silence. The goddess's face was blackened, but her eyes still looked forward. The man who ordered the fire back on Guam, Curtis LeMay, lit a fresh cigar. His officers waited as he read the reconnaissance report. 40 square miles destroyed, 1 million homeless, 90,000 confirmed dead. LeMay exhaled smoke slowly. "That's good efficiency," he said. An aide shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the loss is on the ground." LeMay cut him off. You want to lose fewer men, you end the war faster. We'll keep going. Osaka next. Nagoya after that, he tapped ash into a tin tray. Every factory they move into a house, every worker that makes bullets at the kitchen table, that's the war. We burned the war tonight, no one spoke. Outside, the sea wind carried the faint smell of oil and rain. In the distance, the engines of another formation began to warm. The ghost city. When American reconnaissance planes flew over Tokyo 2 days later, their cameras captured a city that no longer cast shadows. Every wooden structure had burned. Even stone walls were blackened. The film, developed that afternoon, showed only patterns, streets etched in white where fire breaks had been, and endless gray beyond. A single American analyst wrote in the margin of the report, "No targets remaining." From the ruins, survivors began rebuilding in silence. They gathered bricks, hammered nails from charred beams, and planted rice in burned-out lots. Life, stubborn and fragile, refused to die, but the smell of smoke would linger for months. Rain turned the ashes to black mud that clung to skin. Children played with fragments of melted glass, too young to remember what had come before. Aiko walked each morning to the river to wash the dust from her hands. One day she looked up and saw a white flag flying over a school that no longer stood. It was a futon sheet tied to a pole, flapping weakly in the wind. For a moment it looked like peace. Dawn over Tokyo came like the light over a battlefield long after the guns had gone silent, a light too clean for what it revealed. The rising sun filtered through columns of smoke that drifted over the ruins, illuminating a city that no longer had streets, no longer had names. The air smelled of charcoal and rust. The wind carried dust made from the bones of houses. The once proud capital of the Japanese Empire had become a map of loss. Entire districts, Koto, Fukagawa, Asakusa, were erased. Where markets once clattered and trams screeched down rails, now only crows circled over ash. The survivors wandered the gray fields like ghosts, each step stirring what had once been home. Aiko Shimada moved among them, her face streaked with soot and tears that left pale trails. She clutched the cracked ceramic statue of cannon she had pulled from the ruins, holding it against her heart as if it could still grant mercy. Around her, the heat rising from the ground blurred the air, twisting the horizon into a trembling mirage. The Empire had promised eternity. What remained was dust. The morning after Hellas, the first rescue units entered the city. They found silence more unbearable than any sound. No shouting, no engines, no footsteps on pavement. Only the soft hiss of cooling embers. Here and there, a telephone pole still smoldered, its wires sagging like vines. The canals were choked with bodies. The water steamed under the weak morning sun. The imperial palace, miraculously untouched, stood like a relic of another age. Inside its walls, Emperor Hirohito's staff waited for reports that never came. The phone lines were dead. Couriers returned pale, trembling, unable to describe what they had seen. In one surviving government building, a colonel stared out over the smoke and muttered, "We have lost our capital." Another answered, "Then perhaps we have lost the war." But outside, the machinery of denial still turned. Radio Tokyo broadcast that enemy planes caused minor damage to industrial zones, while urging citizens to rebuild with the Emperor's divine strength. The voice that carried this lie cracked midway through the transmission, drowned out by static, a ghostly echo of the flames still burning in the distance. The reckoning in the sky on Guam. 3,500 miles away, the 314th Bomb Wing landed to a hero's welcome. The ground crews cheered, clapping the pilots on the back, congratulating them for breaking the back of Japan's war industry. But the airmen themselves were silent. Colonel Jack Phillips stepped down from his B-29, his boots blackened with soot that had drifted into the bomb bay, and followed them home. He looked at the horizon, not east toward the enemy, but west into the setting sun. In the debriefing tent, the men sat under a single buzzing lamp as officers read off statistics. Target area destroyed of 40 square miles. Casualties, estimated 80,000 to 100,000. Mission success and confirmed. No one applauded. The numbers felt hollow, as if they measured something far larger than victory. One gunner whispered, "That's more than Hiroshima will ever be." Another replied, "We're not done yet." Phillips said nothing. He lit a cigarette, his hands shaking, and watched the smoke curl upward like the columns that still rose from Tokyo. Curtis LeMay in his office. Brigadier General Curtis LeMay studied aerial photographs spread across his desk. Tokyo looked like a ghost image, nothing but shadows where life had been. He exhaled through his cigar and said to his aide, "Now they'll listen." When a correspondent asked if he regretted the loss of life, LeMay replied coldly, "If I could burn Japan to the ground to save one American boy, I'd do it again tomorrow." He didn't sleep that night. He never did after raids like this. Instead, he paced the runway, the smell of kerosene thick in the tropical air, planning the next targets: Nagoya, Kobe, Osaka. Each name was another spark waiting to be struck. LeMay believed in ending the war by any means. In his mind, the fire was mercy, swift, decisive, final. But even he couldn't ignore what Tokyo had become. A city like that, he told his chief of staff quietly. Once it's gone, it never comes back the same. Survivors in Tokyo, rescue teams dug through the ruins with shovels and bare hands. The heat still radiated from the ground, burning their souls through canvas boots. They found nothing living. When they did find remains, they were fused together. Families locked in final embraces, frozen in carbon. Doctors worked without anesthesia, performing amputations in burned-out schools converted into makeshift hospitals. Morphine had run out within hours. Nurses wiped ash from the eyes of the wounded using strips of cloth torn from their own uniforms. The air was filled with the smell of disinfectant and charred wood, and beneath it something worse. In one corner of the city, a priest walked among the dead carrying a handbell. He rang it softly, whispering prayers over each body he passed. At the edge of the Sumida River, he stopped to rest. The bell slipped from his fingers and rolled into the water, vanishing beneath the steam. Aiko joined a group of survivors searching for water. They found a shallow well that still held a few inches at the bottom. They cupped the gray liquid in their hands and drank without speaking. When she looked up, she saw the smoke rising over the ruins like incense from 1,000 unseen altars. The empire in denial. Inside the imperial palace, Hirohito listened as his ministers read casualty reports. Their voices shook. One said, "Your Majesty, the people are suffering." Another countered, "The divine land must endure. We will rebuild." The emperor's face remained expressionless, but his eyes lingered on a single photograph. Tokyo before the war, a panorama of shining rooftops and bustling markets. He whispered something no one heard, perhaps a prayer, perhaps an apology. Outside the walls, the city still smoldered. Ash fell like snow on soldiers guarding the palace gates. They stood at attention, their rifles clean, their faces hollow. Somewhere beyond the palace moat, a woman sang, her voice thin, rising above the silence. A lullaby for a child who would never wake. Across the sea back in the Marianas, new bomb loads were already being prepared. Mechanics worked through the night, oil lamps flickering against the silver skins of the bombers. They spoke little, hands black with grease, shirts soaked with sweat. LeMay's orders were clear. Continue incendiary attacks. Target every major urban center. The crews followed orders because that was all they had left. The war had become mechanical. Flight plans, altitudes, coordinates, payloads. Morality had no altitude. On March 11th, just 48 hours after Tokyo burned, another formation lifted off toward Nagoya. And then Osaka, and then Kobe. Japan's cities began to vanish one by one, erased by fire from the sky. But for the men who had seen Tokyo, nothing ever looked the same again. Letters home weeks later. A letter reached Phillips from his wife in Kansas. It was written before the Tokyo raid. "Jack, they say you boys are making history. I hope you're safe. I hope you sleep." He folded the paper slowly and placed it in his flight jacket. He hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the reflection of fire on metal, the flicker of cities vanishing beneath his plane. That night, he walked to the edge of the runway and stared out at the sea. The stars were bright, unbothered. He thought of the people below those stars, people who would never see them again. He took out the letter, read it once more, then tore it in half and let the wind take it. The cost of victory by the end of March 1945. The raids had killed more than 300,000 Japanese civilians. Tokyo's death toll alone exceeded that of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Yet for the American High Command, it was only a beginning, proof that fire could win a war faster than words. In Washington, newspapers praised the decisive blow against Japan's war industry. Few mentioned the children, the mothers, the men who died holding each other in rivers of flame. LeMay's strategy was vindicated. Medals were awarded, promotions announced, but in the quiet hours, the pilots and mechanics carried a silence deeper than victory. The silence of those who had seen creation turn to ash, ashes of the empire. By spring, Tokyo began to rebuild. Men cleared rubble with their bare hands. Women planted flowers in blackened courtyards. Children played among twisted steel beams, their laughter faint but real. Aiko Shimada found work sweeping debris from the ruins of a school. Each morning she watched the sun rise through the haze and whispered a prayer to the goddess she carried. Her hair had turned white at 19. On clear days she could still see the outlines of the B-29s in the clouds, the ghosts of machines that had melted her world. Yet she lived. And living, she began to remember. The empire was gone, but Japan remained, scarred, silent, and waiting for what would come next. The smoke that rose over Tokyo hung for days, a shroud that refused to lift. It dulled the sun to a pale disk, turned the sky to gray silk, and left the city beneath it a motionless wound. The wind that once carried the scent of sakura and sea now smelled of ash, oil, and silence. From the air, reconnaissance cameras recorded an emptiness so vast that even the generals who had ordered it found no satisfaction in the images. The mighty capital of the empire of the rising sun, once a living, breathing organism of 13 million souls, now looked like the surface of another planet. 40 square miles of black and white nothing. On the ground, survivors emerged like ghosts. Their footsteps made no sound on the powder of their own city. The slow awakening Aiko Shimada opened her eyes to daylight. The wind had changed overnight, sweeping away some of the smoke, and now thin beams of sunlight cut through the haze like divine fingers. She pushed herself upright, coughing ash from her lungs, and felt something sharp beneath her hand, a melted spoon, twisted into the shape of a question mark. She was surrounded by others, silent figures moving through the wreckage, picking at the ground for food, for memory, for meaning. A boy, his hair white from shock, carried a kettle full of rainwater. An old woman clutched a photograph burned to transparency. Somewhere a baby cried, the sound strange in a world that seemed to have no air left. The emperor's radio had gone silent. The trains no longer ran. The city that had once stretched endlessly in every direction now ended in horizon lines of smoke. People spoke in whispers, as if afraid to wake something still sleeping under the ash. Counting the dead by March 13th, 2 days after the raid, the imperial government estimated 83,000 dead, but the number was a lie. It was higher by tens of thousands. Whole neighborhoods had disappeared, records burned with the homes that kept them. Police counted corpses along the Sumida until they stopped counting. The rivers had become tombs. When they ran out of stretchers, they used doors. When they ran out of doors, they carried the bodies in their arms. In one schoolyard, rescuers found 2,000 people who had sought shelter in a trench. All had suffocated. Their bodies were layered like pages in a burned book. A soldier who helped dig them out wrote later, "We pulled them up one by one, and every face was the same color as the ashes around them." The Japanese press could not print the truth. Instead, headlines called it the night of the great air battle. But there had been no battle. Only fire. The American silence on Guam, the airfields buzzed again. Crews prepared new loads, fuel lines snaked across the tarmac, and men checked weather reports for the next night's target. Tokyo was already fading from conversation. Another mission completed, another city erased. Colonel Phillips walked alone along the runway. His uniform was clean, but his face was hollow, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. The wind carried the smell of jet fuel and salt. He thought of what they had left behind, not as a map, not as a target, but as a sound, the deep, living roar of a city dying. That night he wrote a single line in his logbook, "We made the earth burn." LeMay reviewed reports in silence, his cigar smoke curling upward like the smoke of Tokyo itself. "Next," he said, "Nagoya." The unspoken reckoning news reached Washington 3 days later. The president was briefed. Over 100,000 dead, 1 million homeless. The map of Tokyo had changed color from gray to black. The general staff called it a success. No one spoke of the civilians. Not in public. Not yet. But the photographs began to circulate. Grainy, monochrome, horrifying in their quiet. Streets lined with the outlines of vanished houses. Children walking barefoot through fields of charcoal. In one, a Japanese mother sits by a canal holding a baby wrapped in cloth, both blackened by soot, their faces calm, almost serene. An American analyst who saw the image whispered, "We did this?" Another replied, "We had to." Somewhere between those two sentences, the world crossed a line it could never uncross. Fire becomes strategy, March became April, and April became May. The 314th flew again and again to Osaka, to Kobe, to Yokohama. Each mission followed the same pattern: low altitude, open bomb bays, and the rain of napalm that turned night into day. The strategy worked. Japan's industries shattered, its supply lines vanished. But with each firestorm, the line between victory and vengeance blurred. The sky itself had become a weapon, and the men who flew within it began to see themselves as something less than human, operators in a machine designed to erase cities. Phillips stopped writing letters home. His men stopped talking about the war. They counted missions instead of days. When one of his gunners died in a takeoff accident, Phillips said nothing. He simply looked at the rising smoke from the wreckage and murmured, "One less to remember." The empire crumbles. Tokyo's government, crippled by chaos, tried to function amid the ashes. Ministries relocated to the countryside, their files carried in bundles tied with rope. The emperor's ministers met in dim chambers, whispering of surrender but too afraid to say it aloud. The war could no longer be won, but it could still be lost with dignity. Or so they told themselves. They had not yet seen Hiroshima. Iko wandered through the remains of Ueno, searching for her brother. She found instead a wall, all that remained of their family home. On it, scratched into the plaster with something sharp, were 3 words: "We are here." She placed her hand over the letters and felt the heat still radiating from the stone. The city, it seemed, was still alive, and faintly, painfully. The sky turns again. By June, the summer rains came. They fell softly on Tokyo's blackened ruins, hissing on still hot metal and turning the ashes into rivers of gray mud. The air smelled of wet wood and decay. But for the first time since March, there was no fire in the sky. Children ran through the rain, laughing. Their feet splashed through puddles that reflected the twisted skeletons of buildings. Some survivors began planting vegetables in the ruins: cabbage, beans, anything that would grow. For Iko, the rain was baptism. She stood in the open, her face turned upward, the water washing away layers of soot until her skin showed through again. Across the Pacific, the men of the 314th watched the same rain fall on their wings before another mission. It was just weather to them, but for Tokyo it was grace. The future in ash. When the war ended that August, it did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. The bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally silenced the emperor's armies. But for those who had survived Tokyo, surrender had already come months before. In the shape of fire, occupation forces arrived in autumn. American photographers walked through the ruins, taking pictures of children smiling in front of burned-out temples. Tokyo began to hum again, weakly, stubbornly, like a heart restarting after near death. Iko worked for a relief agency, translating for the Americans. She learned their words for things: building, bread, peace. But some words, like loss, needed no translation. One day she visited the Sumida River. The water was clear again. The smell was gone. She placed the cracked statue of Cannon at the river's edge and whispered, "For all of us." The tide took it slowly, silently, until it vanished beneath the ripples. The men who remembered years later, Phillips would stand before an audience in a veterans hall in Kansas. The crowd clapped as he approached the podium, medals gleaming on his chest. He began to speak of strategy, precision, victory. But halfway through, his voice faltered. He looked down at his notes, then folded them. "We did what we were told to do," he said quietly. "We believed it would end the war, and it did." He paused. "But I still see the light." He stepped away from the podium and walked out into the night. The city that would not die, Tokyo, rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible. Within 10 years, the city was alive again. steel and concrete rising where wood had burned, neon lights glowing where once there had been flame. But beneath the new streets lay the ashes of the old, sealed under pavement and time. And every spring, when the cherry blossoms bloomed, the wind carried a faint scent of smoke as if the city itself remembered. For Aiko Shimada, now an old woman, the sound of airplanes still made her flinch. But when she stood beneath the blossoms, she no longer felt only sorrow. She felt the heartbeat of a city that refused to vanish, a city that had walked through fire and found its way back into the light. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could almost hear the voices of those who hadn't made it, whispering, laughing, alive in memory. Tokyo, 1945, burned, broken, reborn.